Good evening, and thank you for joining us for our town hall event on education in Texas. I'm Michael Atkinson. Tonight, I'm joined with Ken Zarafis, President of Education Austin, Dr. Natalie Nichols, Senior Chief of Schools and Innovation for Round Rock ISD, Laura Colangelo, Executive Director for the Texas Private Schools Association, Brian Gunther, the President of the San Marcos Academy, Andy Hogue with the Travis County Republican Party, and Pooja Sethi, Chair of the Travis County Democratic Party. We're also joined here in our studio with a live audience, and we'll hear their questions for our panel here in just a moment. But I want to just start jumping right into the conversation, beginning with a top issue for state leaders, which the name of which itself is politicized. Proponents have labeled it school choice or education savings accounts. Critics call them school vouchers. Andy, I want to start with you and talk a little bit about what this debate is going to look like as we head into this next session. How significant is the conversation going to be around school choice as we head into the next legislative session?
No, I think it's going to be the main issue. We saw what Governor Abbott did last session. It became the determinant of whether or not you got funding for your schools. So I don't think he's going to back off. Matter of fact, I see more conservative Republicans, more school choice advocates ready to fight, and Governor Abbott doubling down on his previous messages. So we're going to see this be the big line of scrimmage this session.
Pooja, I want to ask the same question to you now from the Democratic side. How significant is this battle going to be?
Oh, it's going to be really significant. It's going to be one of the top issues that are there. But as we've seen just from last session, I mean, it's died again and again, and rural Republicans and rural Republicans voted against it, a lot of them, and Democrats have voted. It's a bipartisan issue, and it died last session, and hopefully they stand their ground and stand up for public schools and public school kids.
I want to get a little more into the nuts and bolts of exactly what we're talking about here. Laura, would love to turn with you. We've obviously spoken about school choice extensively with you. I want to start by talking about exactly what we mean when we talk about this idea. You know, at the end of the day, these are, and I feel like the whole idea behind private education was to have as little state involvement as possible. So kind of explain to me how you have those two truths at the same time.
141 private accredited nonprofit schools in the state. And one of the things I hear consistently is that they have to turn away families who cannot afford the tuition for the school when their private scholarship money runs out. And so they are interested in serving those families who are looking for another option. And let me back up and say that most children are going to stay in their public schools. They love their public schools. We respect our public school friends. This is not an either-or situation. But this is going to be a program for those families that do need another option. If you look at the bill from last session, we're talking about maybe 40,000 students statewide who would be able to participate in a school choice program. And there are a couple of items that we would have to see in the bill in order to support it from the TPSA standpoint, which we can talk about when we get granular. But basically, this is a way for those families who do need another option to have another option and expand the way that we do education in Texas to serve the needs of every child in the state.
To the point of what you said about it not being an either or, rather, I think the public school advocates, we'll probably hear from them in a moment, would say it is an either or. You cannot have a fully funded public education system and a school choice system. You disagree with that?
I think you can. It's a both-and situation, and I think that's what we're about to discuss and hopefully pass in 2025.
With that, Ken, I want to ask you the same question. Do you think you can have both a fully funded public education system and a school choice system?
Absolutely not. I think the same thing has been bandied about throughout the country. You have Arizona, Ohio, Iowa, my home state, that have all made huge promises about it won't take much money away from public education. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in Arizona, the promise was 65 million. It actually is beginning to cost taxpayers $955 million, over 10 times as much as what was projected, and it's made a huge impact on their state funding. These are not things that are going to be able to work together. Public is public, private is private, and it's really about public schools were made for the collective. That's our strength. When you start dealing with individuals, you get away from that larger strength, and it hurts kids.
At the same time, as you heard, the argument for a sort of vouchers-like program, ESA school choice, is that these are families who would not be able to attend a private school and may not be getting the level of granular attention that they think they deserve in a public education system. What's your argument against that?
I am a product of public schools. I taught in public schools for 12 years. All 3 of my children have gone to public public schools and have gotten a wonderfully granular education, have had great teachers. And what we need to do, rather than pulling money away from public schools, is we need to continue to invest in public schools to make them the best schools possible. And what we envision for public education, that's the greatness of this country, is our public school system. And vouchers, let's not use a euphemism on savings accounts. These are vouchers, and they will take money away from our schools and from the kids that they claim to want to take care of.
Natalie and Brian, I want to turn this conversation out to you. You guys are folks with your boots on the ground in the public education system and the private education system. Natalie, it's going to be the same question. I'll start with you, though. What is a school choice program going to look like affecting your public education system if you think one is to take effect?
So first, let me start by saying this. We use this idea of school choice, and as an English teacher, the word choice has a very positive connotation, but it is not really a choice. If I am a student with special needs, it doesn't mean that I can go to many of these places and get the same level of service that I can get in my public school. You have schools where the choice where I go to this organization, if my discipline does not look a certain way, if I don't fit into a certain mold, all of a sudden I don't have the choice to stay there. So I think the thing for us that we're talking about, if it was truly this idea of choice, and I was able to get the same level of service everywhere, and each and every school, whether it is private or public, the same rules apply to everyone, that's a much different thing. So I think when we talk about this idea of choice, we're really thinking we're in an even playing field, and I think we need to pull the conversation back even more and really talk about what does that mean, and what is the level of service, and what is the level of responsibility for each of the different organizations. It's not the same. I think for us in public education, if it was a matter of we're all being held to the same level of responsibility, it would be a very different conversation, but that's not the conversation that we're having right now.
Brian, what say you to that?
I would say that school choice doesn't change what private schools already do. I am the head of a 117-year-old institution and have provided opportunities for students for the last 117 years. Our diversity is found in our opportunities given to our students. Being a part of a boarding school, having a boarding option, we have students from around the world that come to be a part of our institution. When we look at how does that affect our education and what we deliver and our policies, it doesn't affect us one bit. It doesn't change one thing that we do. But what it does do is it provides opportunities for students and families who may not have had that opportunity in the past. It won't change the level of our tuition. We're not going to change the level of our tuition. We're not going to change our admission standards. We're not going to change anything that we do except for opening doors to more opportunities for students and families who would not have had that in the past.
And with that, we want to turn it now to our audience here in our studio for their questions, if they have any, about school choice and school vouchers. What kind of questions are you guys looking to ask for our panelists about where the legislature is headed in the next session and what school choice would look like?
Candace Johnson, and I am a fifth-year teacher. I'm a new teacher because I started out as a journalist and now I'm in education. And I can say that as a public school teacher, what this looks like to me is at the beginning of the school year, many of our students that are in special education, those who have discipline problems, they are gone because the parents many times feel that the public school system can't meet the needs. They go to charter schools, and we save desks for them because we know that if they are a discipline problem or they don't fit into the mold, that they are going to be returned. But when they come back, oftentimes that money doesn't come back. So the question is that if they are sent to these private entities and that money goes with them, when does it come back so that when they return to our schools, we'll be able to meet their needs?
Andy, you reacted to that. Do you have a response that you want to share?
Yeah, just a little bit. In terms of their needs, when does the money come back to the schools? I think that depends on, of course, the budget bill that's arrived at. There's a lot of X factors here. What we end up with this session may not look at all like the last session's bill. So that's a very good question to ask. When do you get the money? Is it in time to make up for any deficits that you may have incurred between now and then? Those are all very good questions. I think ones that need to be mentioned at the committee meetings coming up.
ESAs will be paid out quarterly. So if something happens, then it's not a full year payment. Then if the child leaves the private school and goes back, then the public school is getting that money at the next quarter.
Quarterly.
But to be clear, none of that is guaranteed, right?
Right.
I mean, none of that is a guarantee. I mean, it's...
Well, if it's in the bill, then it will be.
Right.
The previous bill, yeah.
Now, there's nothing that's in the bill. And in the past, there have been bills that have come out that have not had that in there. And I think there's a lot of concerns with especially with special needs parents that, yes, if their child gets accepted into a private school, the private school doesn't provide the IEP or what they need, the child, they can frankly kick them out, and then the child is stranded and would have to go back to the public school. The money doesn't follow them, and then you're ultimately defunding the public school from the resources that it would take to help that child.
I think it's also important because what happens here in other states is when vouchers are talked about, they're talked about helping kids that don't have as much, giving them an opportunity. When you look at the states that have implemented vouchers, it's a small percentage of those vouchers go to the kids that they're being claimed for. It kind of becomes an uncomfortable reality, almost using kids that are deemed as needy, and we're going to help you. And it becomes this, you know, it's this really unsavory reality of using kids so that really the reality is that the rich folks, the privileged folks that already have a lot of money and can go to private schools are getting a coupon for $6,000, $7,000 to be able to put in their pocket. True in the states where vouchers are being used. It's true.
In Florida, the families that use the ESAs in Florida, they're primarily low-income single mothers of color that use that program, and they make, I think the average is about $42,000 a year. And those are the kind of people that if we're supporting a bill, we want to make sure that it goes for low-income families, that those families are prioritized, and those with special needs children. The poor and the vulnerable are what we want focused and prioritized in the bill.
So do vouchers cover the entire tuition, or is it a portion of tuition? Because
it depends on the school. We have 941 different schools. So the average, and I wrote it down, so the K-8 average, the median tuition for K-8 is $8,900 a year. The average is $10,000. This is statewide, $965. And then in high school, it's a little bit more. The median's $12,500, and the average is $14,986. So if we're talking about last time, it was about $10,500. That doesn't cover the average for 9th through 12th. But there are already private scholarship funds in those schools right now. That's how we're operating in private schools right now. So this augments an already very successful and robust scholarship program for private schools.
Well, you gave an example of Florida. I can give another example. I think it was Arizona or Ohio, where the majority of kids who took it were already private school children, and their parents were basically taking the voucher and using it for their kids already there. They've also shown studies that for a lot of the communities that you represent, private schools are hard for them. They have to drive out of their way to get there. A lot of families don't have transportation or cars. Private schools aren't in their area. They're not close, or you know, they're just not accessible for parents. So I think when we're talking about these families, are we really providing them the best option, or are we just telling ourselves that we are?
Oh, I want to turn it now to our audience. I believe we have another question from an audience member.
Hi, Michelle, and I am a current parent of a private school student here in the state of Texas. And speaking about parents who can't afford to go, as a parent of a current student, I know plenty of my friends and our students at our school who are foregoing all sorts of things. They are using the scholarships at our school to be able to attend. Mom and dad are working an extra job to be able to attend our private school. It isn't just the wealthy. In fact, the majority of the parents at our school are, both parents are working outside of the home, and they are working extra hours to be able to send their child to the private school because it is their choice to be able to do that. I believe that the school choice system would allow those parents to maybe spend a little bit more time with their kids and not have to work so hard to be able to send their child to a school that they are choosing based either on their belief or that it is the best option for their family. And so as we're talking about whether or not parents of students already enrolled in is the future look like for that? Will it be optional for parents who already have a child enrolled, or will it be just for those who are not enrolled in school?
Well, I could talk about the evolution of this discussion, because if you had asked me 5 years ago when we were debating this, I would have said that this was going to be a switcher bill, which means it was only applied to children in public schools switching to private schools. However, in last session, Senator Drew Springer stood up on the Senate floor and said, wait a minute, I can get behind this, but what about my constituents that are working 2 and 3 jobs to pay for their private school tuition? They're not going to get anything. And that's, I don't know if you remember this, but that's when the conversation turned, and I had not seen anything like that before, and all of a sudden everyone's like, well, okay, he has a point. So if there are low-income families that need this sort of help, whether they're in private school or not, then they should be able to take advantage. But again, we're not talking about wealthy families that are in the private schools. We're talking about those that need help to provide the education for their kids.
Ken, what say you to that?
Well, you know, I want to say I really appreciate you sharing that. I think it's really important for us to hear that. And so thank you. And because that's a choice that your family's making. And it's important to follow what you feel for your children. That said, that's a choice. And within our system, we have a publicly funded system that's based on the taxpayers. And it says we're going to fund schools. And then when we take that money, that is precious money to help every kid, all kids, period, and we pull away from that, and it will pull away. There is no doubt about it. It will pull away funding from public schools, which is already, we're in the bottom 10 states. We're in the bottom 10 states in the country in public school funding already. We're already at an anemic level of funding, and we're going to take more money away from it. And it has happened in other states where it's being used, and vouchers are happening. And so you're going to take money away from it. You have to take money because it's private funds. That's unacceptable for us. That a parent wants to do that, I applaud them. And for working in the extra job, if that's a value, I applaud them for that. Because there are families that have had to work 2 and 3 jobs for generations and to support their children. They're continuing to do that. I don't think that we should give them a coupon for $6,000 away from public education into a private school.
Andy, it sounded like you had something to say to that.
Yeah, I don't think that's true at all. I think what's happening is we're spending more and more on the education system and not our classrooms. I think our teachers are getting the short end of the stick, and I say that as the spouse of a public school teacher. I know exactly. It's been a long time since we've seen a real substantive raise, and it's ironic. Every time we've talked about a raise, it seems like the teachers' unions don't like it because it's Greg Abbott's idea. But it's time we get together and really work on making sure that, 1, money is going to the classrooms, and 2, that school choice actually helps our schools. And right now, we're talking about paying schools for pupils lost. That's not a bad deal, and overall, I think if you manage the money right at the district level, that shouldn't be a factor at all. So I don't know if what you're saying is true, and I don't know if that matches up with what's going on in other states with school choice.
Can I go ahead and add to that for just a second? Because I think invariably, part of this discussion comes back to this idea that in some way, shape, or form, that money is being mismanaged within public education. One of the things that I tell whether it be my teachers, my campus level, everyone that we work in, who owns the pattern. If over 80% of the school districts in the state, the great state of Texas, are not able to pass a balanced budget, who owns that pattern? And what does it say about how we're being funded and the difficulty then that districts are having in order to pay their bills? You can't say that over 80% of the districts, that everyone has just decided, let's just mismanage money and throw it away. There's something inherently wrong in the way we're funded. And then when we then say that we're going to pull more money out, all we're going to do is stress the system further. Added to it is the sense of this is not truly a discussion on choice. If you had a campus and where you said you are being held to the same accountability as public schools, if you have to take a student that is in a functional academic class, a student who is emergent bilingual, a student who is, if you had to take every student that came to your doors and offer them a service, however that student showed up, discipline issues, special education, language issues, whatever it is, if you had to be held to the same accountability and responsibility, this would be a totally different conversation, but it's not. And so the idea then of we get to give money to this, to other organizations outside of public education, and you're not held to the same standard, that to me inherently is where the issue is at. If we were all held to exactly the same standards, then I don't think that would be an issue. That would truly be choice, but we are not talking about choice in the truest sense of the word. We're saying that what you are responsible for and I'm responsible for are two totally different things. I have to have a Statue of Liberty-like agreement. Give me you're tired, you're poor. We have to take everyone, and you do not. You have that. You have school choice then in who you take and who you keep. I do not have to have that same choice. But yet, we're saying then, not the same, but you then get to get public dollars. Again, I think the discussion, there's so many nuances to it that we really don't talk about it. If we truly want choice, then there has to be this idea of we're all held to the same standards, and we're not.
I'd love to turn it to Brian, if I can, actually, talking about what goes into those decisions that, you know, talking about choice and what goes into the decisions of who to accept into a private school. What does that look like for someone like you and the school that you have?
The last thing I ever want to do is to put a student in an environment where they're going to hate learning. I don't want them to be in a place where they don't enjoy learning, where they aren't thriving, where they aren't growing. And for students, if we're unable to do that, it's not saying we don't accept you as a family. It's saying we're not able to provide for you what you need, but here are options that are available to you. We always provide options for our families. I work hand in hand with our superintendent in our district. We go back and forth all of the time. I know what resources are available to those families in the public sector, which often do a way better job than private schools are able to do on those specific areas. And we applaud our public school system. Hand in hand, we're here for the kids either way. And we want them to grow and thrive and become the next and future leaders of Austin, of Texas, in our legislature and in the world. The best way to do that is to provide for them the best opportunity for learning. And that's how we focus our decisions for our students. If we cannot provide the best opportunity, then we would be doing them a disservice to ask them to be part of our school.
I'm going to turn the conversation now to another topic. Thank you all for that lively discussion. I want to talk a little bit about last month, the Texas State Board of Education gave approval to a public school curriculum that both critics and supporters have noticed is heavily influenced by Christian teachings. Public school districts are also incentivized to adopt those curricula and could earn $60 per student in their district, an incentive some schools may think is too good to resist.
This movement towards public education in particular, and really this focus on the role that public schools play in teaching kids important life lessons.
With the headline-making vote from Texas education officials approving the controversial Bluebonnet curriculum with religious teachings, what's next for schools? For one, as we've reported, the school districts adopting this Bluebonnet could receive as much as $60 per student. When the state legislature first passed the law calling for a new state curriculum, a legislative budget board and 6% of schools could adopt the curriculum by next fall, growing to 81% in 4 years. At those rates, $60 per student means the board estimated the state could spend more than $1 billion in those incentives in 5 years.
The reality is that, you know, districts often also might not like the strings that are attached with that money, but they might decide that the money is more important to them than their dislike of what strings are attached to it.
It's up to each local school district to adopt the curriculum, which includes, for example, this fifth grade teaching on Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper and quotes directly from the biblical passage of Matthew. This third grade teaching on the Roman Empire extensively details the life of Jesus, noting that in the years that followed his crucifixion, many heard believers' stories about the resurrection of Jesus, that he had risen from the dead. There's also this kindergarten teaching on art appreciation, which asks students to sequence the order of the Hebrew Christian creation story, with correct answers like God created light and God created the first man and woman in the Garden of Eden.
And those are unfortunate narratives that their intentions are to be divisive.
Republican Senator Brandon Creighton chairs the Senate Education Committee and sponsored the policy. You don't think you can have that curriculum without those religious aspects?
Well, we can and we have, right? But we could also have better opportunities to understand the references so that they also understand these references in other parts of history within our curriculum.
Andy, I want to pick it up right where Senator Creighton left it off and start with you. Do you agree with him? Do you think it's not possible to have a curriculum that advances our students' education and it must have those Christian teachings? Do you believe that?
I think Senator Creighton hit the nail on the head. There's a lot of narratives out there, a lot of talking points, but few people have actually read the curriculum so far. I took a look at it. I'm one of those nerdy people that actually do things like that. And it looked pretty basic. Look, I teach Sunday school sometimes, okay? And if I were teaching my Sunday school kids that kind of stuff, I wouldn't get anywhere with them. It's the very bottom basics of just who we are. Tell you, John 3:16 doesn't say turn or burn. It just says this is who we are. This is what the Bible teaches. And yeah, you might learn a thing or two about what motivated the Pilgrims to come here, what motivated Jamestown. There's so much we need to know about our origins before we understand who we are. And I think right now, just looking at the way so many kids are despondent and hopeless about the future, it wouldn't hurt to teach them about their heritage, especially in a Judeo-Christian context.
You saw that curriculum that was just on the screen, though. You think that, let's say
Yes.
there's an Islamic student in a class who now has to learn about Christianity. You see no problem with that?
No problem at all. I think, matter of fact, it would help interreligious dialogue. A lot of people come to this country expecting that and don't get it until they go to church. And then they said, all we did was just we sung 4 songs and heard a motivational sermon, and that was it. So I think it would be a good chance to really have basics of that.
Can I respond?
Pooja, please.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm Hindu. My son is Hindu. My husband is Hindu. You're telling my child who is Hindu, we celebrate Diwali. Mm-hmm. First of all, we're not a neighbor. We're American citizens. We're from this country, so our heritage.
I didn't mean you. I meant immigrants that don't know anything
But
about
there's a lot of people
Yes.
who are of other religions and
Correct.
cultures, and so you're telling it's not the heritage. You can't say that that's the heritage. It's not our heritage. We're raised and born Hindu, and that's what my son is learning. I don't have a problem with him learning other religions. I would also love for there to be teaching of other religions, other beliefs in the classroom. If we're going to do that, we need to teach everything. You have to be inclusive of everything. You can't teach one thing to an entire group of students and let them feel included and like they're a part of the classroom and like they're a part of this country and that they belong. That's not how this works. That's not America.
Let's do it, but let's do it in proportion. Well, I think America and our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, it all has a Judeo-Christian orientation, and we can do it in a way that doesn't make your Hindu family and your friends feel out of place. There's a way to do it, and I think we need to have that discussion, but not addressing it and trying to pretend like Christianity is a minority faith, just like Sikhism, for instance. That's not honest. We are a majority Christian nation, and we need to be honest about that and teach kids what that means and then have the discussion. But if we don't, then we're starting off from a false premise, which is that every religion starts out equally. That's not necessarily the case. But we do need to have discussions about what each faith believes, and I think that's, I say, yeah, bring it. Let's discuss Hinduism. Let's discuss Islam. And I think we're doing that well in our schools right now. My kids tell me what the 4 Noble Truths of the Buddha were the other day. They learned it in high school, and I forgot what they were. So I'm glad they learned it in school.
Well, it's good you're saying that because none of that has been discussed at the ledge. And also, you brought up the Constitution. I mean, at some point, we have separation from church and state. I would love to see us looking at the Constitution again. That would be great.
Okay, there you go.
Ken, I want to ask you specifically about the $60 incentive for schools to adopt that. Is that something that you think AISD would look at? We're talking about public school funding and in many cases the lack thereof. Is that incentive going to be too good to be true in a sense?
This is just a mind-blowing. I grew up in a church, you know, it was a Pentecostal church, and I went to Sunday school, and that's where it needs to stay, is in Sunday school. But in terms of the money, this is such an ugly, it's just like you mentioned, unions don't want increases in funding for raises. It's just not true. We don't want legislation tied to money tied to a bill and held hostage. And that's what this is doing. This is incentivized indoctrination. And, you know, it's so ironic that that all people on the right are yelling about indoctrination this, indoctrination in the trans community, in the religious community. The kids are being indoctrinated. This is indoctrination because you're saying, listen, we're gonna give you $60 a kid if you use our curriculum, which is heavy on the Christian nationality, right? It's heavier on Christianity than any other faith.
Okay.
It is.
Yeah.
We're promoting it because you're saying it's the foundation of our country. It's what everybody needs to understand. Everybody should know it. That's indoctrination. And we're saying, and we're going to say that we're going to pay you money to do it. And when people are desperate for money because the state doesn't fund public education and they don't support our school districts, people feel desperate and want that $60. And so they'll compromise. Okay, we'll take the curriculum. Give us our $60. That's an ugly exchange of dollars for curriculum. That's not what public education is. The governor and the legislature needs to stop holding hostage dollars for indoctrination and their belief system. It's wrong. It's just wrong.
Natalie, I want to ask a similar question to you, turning it towards Round Rock ISD. That $60 incentive per student, is that something that Round Rock ISD would look at and say, you know what, whatever we feel about this curriculum, we need the money? Is that something you guys would consider?
I would say yes, but let me give some more information because, as always, there's so much pieces of information that's missing. So I think many people would agree, number one, the foundation of our country is religious freedom. It never said it was specifically that. It was founded on this idea of religious freedom. Many people, when we look at it again, from the perspective of looking at literature, I don't think it's the idea that we do not want these things to be included, but the conversation was that this will be included in the curriculum, and then all other religions would be excluded. So the conversation is more so about the exclusion and what it says about us, the fact that we specifically did not want any other religion to be included. The argument was never about whether or not these things were part of the curriculum. It was the very fact that there was a concerted effort to say no other religion would be included as part of our communities. We have very diverse communities.
Well, it discusses other religions.
We have it does not.
Yes, it does.
We have very diverse communities. If you go through, that is the issue with it.
Are we talking about the Bluebonnet curriculum? Because it actually talks about four other religions.
So
four other religions, ma'am, it's in there.
Very specifically, if you allow me, this is what my job entails.
Okay.
And we've had to go through that specifically to look and see how would that impact us. So we as a district have decided that part of our conversation is then how do we make sure that we show our community that we value them, and then we begin to add those things and write it into our curriculum ourselves. So for us, it's the matter of, and then also here's the other point. The state of Texas has what's called high quality instructional material, and they have a list from which you can choose what is high quality instructional material. And again, there's a lot of things added to that. You can only pick from this list. And that curriculum is part of high quality instructional material. We cannot choose really from other things. There's a cost attached if we do not. And so then again, what happens is this curriculum is considered high quality instructional material, and so we do not have like an option to go pretty much outside of it. And so there are all these different pieces that they have attached that people are not talking about. The exclusion of other things. We're not arguing against having Judeo-Christian teachings within the curriculum. We have it all the time as part of our literature. The idea is the exclusion of it and what it says to our community when we exclude them. We are always talking about the whole child? How do we make sure people feel a sense of belonging and that they belong within a community? Yet we say it on one side, but our actions are showing something completely different. If the whole idea of being a Christian means I am inclusive, I show you how I love you, and what that means, then this really kind of like smacks you in the face that it's the exact opposite of what we're supposed to be teaching. It's almost hypocritical. And our kids are very smart. They call us on it. They watch all of this information and they make judgment about the adults in the building, the fact that we would do this. What does it say then? Do you really want me to belong if this is what the things that you're putting in front of me? So there are a lot of implications. We have a lot of student groups and our kids talk about this. And so it's something as adults we really need to pay attention to. What message are we sending to our children and to our communities based on the things that we put in front of them and what we say that they can have access to. So this is a big conversation. It's not just about the instructional material. I am telling a lot of my community that you don't belong because I am not pulling in the things that are important to you within my curriculum and have that reflect who you are as a community.
Extending the conversation a little bit to another, as you said, there's lots of different facets to this idea. We're also expecting legislation to be refiled this session, which would require public schools to put the 10 Commandments up in their classrooms. Pooja, I want to start with you. You kind of touched on this a little bit. What do you make of this sort of effort to include more religion and specifically more Christianity in our public school classrooms?
Why? I mean, we have so much we need to focus on for our children. We're getting rid of extracurriculars. We're getting rid of social activities. We're getting rid of so many things. The literacy rates in this country, I don't know, studies came out, they're at their lowest. Why is this important? Why does our legislature need to spend time on this? Why is this something they need to focus on? I mean, there's so much. Teacher raises. You brought up teacher raises. Do you know how many bills were filed to raise for like teacher raises? Do you know that Democrats did an entire press conference to do across the board teacher raises? Do you know none of them got hearings? So to say that teachers weren't getting raises or that it wasn't focused on because of the governor, that is completely false. Everyone cares about the teachers. People focused on the teachers, and they didn't get hearings. The bills did not get hearings. Teachers need raises. Staff needs raises. I mean, the kids are suffering. Is this really a priority for the state of Texas? Is this really what we need right now? I mean, come on. No.
I agree.
Sorry.
I agree.
We are
come together, huh?
We are going to talk about teacher raises and public school funding a little bit later in this conversation. Laura and Brian, I want to turn to you guys. I know that this is a little bit out of you guys' realm of expertise. We're talking about public schools. At the end of the day, I know, I feel like it made you guys nervous.
But
we are right. We are talking about the sort of infusion of education and religion. I'd love to talk to you guys about what that experience has been like for you guys in the classroom, of what that looks like. Brian, I'll start with you, of what that looks like in practical, boots on the ground teaching at San Marcos Academy.
San Marcos Academy is a Baptist institution, has been a part of the Baptist General Convention of Texas since its inception in 1907. We have the opportunity to teach Scripture to our students. We have the opportunity to add that as elective credits and as extensive elective credits for our upper school students. We have chapel 3 times a week for our students. We have Mondays, which is our middle school and upper school chapel. Wednesdays, they're separated, and Fridays is our lower school celebration chapel time. And so as a private institution and as a Baptist institution, we have the opportunity to teach Scripture, but here's the difference going from a public classroom into a private classroom is we get to aim that from a doctrinal perspective. That's where indoctrination, if you will, comes from. We get to teach from doctrinal leanings. Our understanding and interpretation of that text is taught at San Marcos Academy. That's the opportunity that we get to do in our location, and that's what it looks like in our classrooms.
Now, Laura, I know that private schools are not all religious per se, but you know that is a heavy part of the conversation of when we talk about what attending a private school look like. Are students, to your knowledge, receptive of that kind of teaching, and are families receptive to that kind of teaching?
Well, about 60 to 70% of the private schools are religious, mainly because to educate their children within the faith. But I have all kinds of religious schools. I have Jewish schools, I have Islamic schools, I have Christian schools, and I have completely non-sectarian schools. So we have a very diverse array of options in the private school world. And what I like about it, just like Brian was saying, if you're in, say, a Catholic school and you're teaching something through the Catholic lens, but you are also talking about other religions and you're offering some critical thinking skills in a conversation in that private school classroom. And so it's not, you're coming through this lens, but you're not just simply saying this is the only way. We're going to talk about Hinduism, we're going to talk about Islam, we're going to talk about Jewish faith, and have a really robust conversation, and a lot of parents are looking for that kind of experience.
I want to turn that now to our audience over here to talk a little bit, obviously a heated discussion about what we make of the infusion of religion and specifically Christianity in our public school classrooms.
Hi, my name is Jake Morgan. I am an English teacher in a public school. I don't teach the majority. I don't teach the minority. I teach everyone who walks through my doors. And right now, we are starving. Public education is facing a crisis. It feels like a manufactured crisis because the money is there, but it is being tied to these bills, or it's being tied to a curriculum that does not adequately address every student in my class, every student in our classrooms, or it is siphoning money away from public education in what feels very much like an either-or scenario. So my question is, what will you all do on this panel, specifically those of you who are allied with these bills that feel to me like you're feeding a starving school poisoned food? What will you do to advocate that we get funding regardless of accepting a curriculum that we don't feel or we might not feel best aligns with our values and our needs? What will you do to make sure that public schools are funded regardless of whether vouchers are passed along with that? Thank you.
Andy, I'll turn that question to you.
Could you make that question more sufficient? I think you kind of had about 4 or 5 different points there in the same question.
Sure, I made a lot of points, but my main point is, to me, very clear. How are you going to make sure that public schools are funded regardless of anything attached to them? We need money. Where's the money? That's my question.
So basically cutting off the strings. I think that's where school choice can really come in handy, is that when we actually begin to fund and invest in school choice, we see that the private sector is running many of these private schools. Of course, you have a mixture of charter schools, private schools, religious schools. They have their own constituencies and motivations, of course. But I think that's actually important that we invest in something that's different than what we see in the public school world. Now, when we're talking about public schools and the strings attached, I do seem to agree, and I might be stepping out of party orthodoxy a little bit by saying this, but I think we need simpler, more straightforward legislation. We're supposed to be the party of smaller government, but we come up with big fat bills every session. We need something a little more smaller, easy to digest, and less strings attached. I don't know if I'm in favor of the $60 per student reward for going with a Bluebonnet curriculum. That may be something that makes a school on the rich side of poor, I think that's an offer we can't refuse. When what was said earlier, you may not want to do that, but hey, we need the money. That's certainly a string we need to cut, in my opinion. So again, I might not be towing the party line there, but I do think simplicity is pretty important. And you raise a very good point, so thank you for addressing that.
I want to turn the conversation now to a topic that most everyone agrees needs to be resolved, but the question is how. School safety. In October, a student was stabbed and killed at Manor Senior High School. A school resource officer was on the scene and was able to apprehend, the alleged perpetrator. We spoke with students and parents that day, and we want to play some of those interviews for you tonight.
A lot of kids think like it can never happen to them, can never be my school. And it's crazy to think that, it's my school, it's happening here, it's somebody I knew. It's just crazy.
I felt honestly, really, really shocked. I thought this was a really surreal experience. I never expected any of this to be happening, especially our school.
My initial reaction to all of this was anger, because you expect your children to be protected and safe.
We want to thank Andy Hogue, the communications director with the Travis County GOP, for joining us tonight. He had a prior commitment and was unable to stay until the end of our town hall. Natalie and Brian, I want to begin with you guys as educators, again, with your boots on the ground. Natalie, I'll start with you. Do you guys go into the work every day and think, is today the day that a tragedy happens? What is it like being an educator today?
So I think oftentimes when we start with these conversations, there's this sense of this is what you live in. I think from that last clip, the student said it well. This is not what you experience and what the emotion and what the feelings are when you go into to school every day. There's this great joy in being an educator. I was telling some of our guests earlier today, there's nothing I ever wanted to. From the very first time I went to school at the age of 4, I knew I was going to be in education. And I did everything possible in order to get there and to have that experience. It is a joy to serve my community. It is a joy to serve educators, to serve students, to work with parents as far as to move their students and have them realize their hope and dreams. So while this is absolutely a tragedy, this is not the everyday that we think that things will happen. But that being said, it doesn't mean that we don't prepare. What we're seeing nowadays is a very different world as far as students, as far as the idea of mental health, what it means to have community and to relate to each other. That is the issue that we're seeing society-wide, where there has been a shift and a change. And because we are part of society, part of the community, then it behooves us to figure out how do we switch and respond to those needs. That's why when we talk about this idea, everything is included. How do we make sure that students feel that they belong, that they have voice, that we have processes in place within the school system to deal with mental health issue, to catch a student that is in despair or in a really bad place early on and turn that future around for them and also work with families. We can no longer say that as school communities that is not part of our responsibility. It is absolutely, especially after COVID, we're seeing more and more. This is part of what our responsibility as schools, part of what we have to offer the community. All of that being said, though, is this. We're talking about safety and security. We were just talking about money and supporting schools. Many of these mandates for safety and security are unfunded. You cannot say that we need to serve the community, we want to keep students safe, and at the same time pass laws to hold us responsible for things, but then there is no funding. So all of these are not separate issues. All of these issues are melded together. I'm hopeful and excited that hopefully there is some sense making in the legislature this year where it is understood that how you support schools differently. All of these things that are happening are outgrowth of decisions that are made at legislative levels. And I hope that they see their responsibility to really support schools. Schools cannot do this by themselves. And so hopefully then there are laws that will be passed in order to not just to say schools are responsible to serve students and their community, but let's make sure that we fund it adequately so schools have a fighting chance.
And we're going to talk about that legislation and the funding behind it in just a moment. Brian, I know it's a different ballpark, your private education, but again, I imagine you have the same sorts of feelings about what it's like to be in a safe school today.
Regardless of private or public, we all have the same students in our campuses. We have families that come to our campuses every day. Some of our campuses are as open and as guarded as other campuses are. That is a challenge we face equally across the board. Our goal as administrators is to make sure that our students feel safe enough in order to gain the best opportunity for learning that they can. The only thing we can do is make sure that in our preparation and in our drills and in our practice and in our training with our faculty and our staff, that we have done enough so that when the time comes to respond, we're able to do so and protect our families and our students and our staff and our faculty. We, as private schools, suffer under some of the same constraints and requirements for safety as the public school system, and also do not receive funding for those same requirements. We have been told that at any time our doors can be checked by the state, just as the public schools can. We had to go through an exterior door audit just like the public schools had to. that was all on the backs of our fundraising and donations because that was outside of our budgets for that year, much like it was for the public school system. So if there's an agreement here tonight, the requirements for safety and security are unfunded statewide.
Yes.
Not just for the public institutions, but also for the private institutions.
And to that point, talking about that legislation, Natalie obviously already brought it up, House Bill 3, which was the touted priority legislation post-Uvalde that the Texas legislature invested in. Pooja, I want to start with talking to you. I'm sure you know the requirements that were in that. Every school campus has to have a peace officer. We've learned from TEA recently that less than half of all schools are fully compliant with that. And schools were given, the number I believe is $10,000 per campus and money per student. What did that make you think as you were leaving the legislature last year? Was legislation left on the table, do you think?
Oh, legislation was left on the table. That's not enough money. I mean, $10,000 for a peace officer, that's absolutely not enough money. A lot of schools which are already underfunded, I mean, they came to us. I remember the trustees came to us, they said, we have no way of paying for this. School safety is imperative. I was actually talking to a friend on the way here, and she said that her daughter, they had an active shooter alert, and her daughter was texting, and my friend said, the only thing that made her feel better is that this year her daughter's, all her classes were on the second floor because she read these studies that school shooters mainly stay on the first floor. And so that's where we're at. That's where we're at as parents. I mean, school safety is a priority, but they're not funding it. They're not funding it properly. I mean, time and time again, everything that comes with our public education, with our schools, with our kids, we're not funding our schools. We're not prioritizing our children and giving them the money they deserve. I mean, they say that the budget is a moral document, and I think that we're being very loud and clear with Texas children on where our morals stand.
And to that, I want to correct myself very quickly. It's $15,000 per campus, not $10,000 per campus. $10 per student.
Still not enough.
To that point, Ken, Austin ISD, how much is that money in the grand scheme of things in Austin ISD?
Well, I think it's a big problem in every ISD. It's not enough, and this is what this state continually does. It doesn't fund its mandates. It doesn't fund what it says it wants to do. So you have a state, and I think I really appreciate that this is a societal problem that is just we see more clearly in our public schools. There has been oppression, lack of funding, disrespect for generations that creates this. Now, when you say that kids shouldn't have access to weapons, they shouldn't, or adults shouldn't have such ready access to guns or whatever it happens to be, then it's like, well, this happened because of mental health. There's a mental health need. Well, we're not funding mental health issues. So there's no robust mental health. Matter of fact, mental health is less than, and the Republicans would probably love to take the ACA and get rid of it. And so you have people that don't want to fund. They want an issue that they look good about supporting, but don't fund it because they want to keep their money. And that's what happens within public education on a regular, but within our society on a regular basis, because it's all about money. And until they start ponying up and giving money to districts to make sure that this is the right curriculum, to make sure that we have good schools, to make sure that we can pay our teachers and school workers what they deserve, to make sure that we have officers, peace officers, and pay them $10,000. That's not a peace officer. That's a piece of an officer. It's ridiculous. It's insulting.
I love those play on words. That was
brilliant. It's insulting.
To that point,
for our kids that are getting hurt, it's unacceptable.
Yeah.
I also want to talk, as we kind of alluded to when we were hearing from Brian, that these private schools are going through the same sorts of, self-evaluation, self-reflections. And I don't know that the average person is familiar, Laura, with the level of regulation that private schools would face when it comes to school safety. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, our private school regulation is our accreditation, and there are accreditation standards. This is kind of a rabbit hole I can go down. I can talk for an hour about private school accreditation, but in terms of school safety, there are standards that each school is evaluated in according to their accreditor and whether they're meeting those safety standards. But if you take a step back and look in a larger view, public schools and what they do in the conversation they're having and the legislation that passed sets a standard of care across the state. So then private schools and the way we operate privately has to meet that standard of care, otherwise you're subject to lawsuits and that sort of thing. So the conversation, while we're not in those particular bills and we're not fighting for the money that we're talking about right now, we're watching the conversation and we're making sure that we are having best practices according to our accreditors and our accreditation, and then looking at the conversation and the standard of care that's changing in Texas. If it's, armed security guards, well, we need to look at that as private schools and make sure that we're integrating those sort of safety practices so that private schools are as safe as public schools.
Everyone is a part of the conversation.
Yes. Yeah.
And with that, it's such an important discussion, and we want to turn it down to our audience for questions on what they feel about the state of school safety in Texas. What questions would you guys ask for our panelists?
Again, as a parent of a student in a private school, my question goes back to mental health. I think we all agree that there is a mental health crisis facing the state of Texas, especially around our children. I'm blessed to have my child go to a school that puts mental health at the forefront by having a mental health counselor full-time on our campus. And we talked a little bit about the dollars not being there. Where do we see, or where do you see, I guess, legislation coming down this year that does put mental health of our students at the forefront as it pertains to the school safety of our children?
I will jump in quickly, and I know we have a lot of opinions there, but I have heard there'll be a conversation about cell phones in schools. So similar to, if you've read the book, the Jonathan Haidt book, you know that that's contributing greatly to mental health issues in children. So again, as private schools, we're sort of outside of that conversation, but watching very carefully and looking for best practices and making sure that what we do in our schools is the best standard of care for kids and their mental health.
I'll turn it to Pooja as well. You work obviously in the legislature, similar to Laura. What do you make of that?
So I know mental health was funded a little bit and expanded upon last session. I do imagine that they are going to do more this session. There were bills to allow counselors on every campus. The bills were shot down. No pun intended. But the bills were shot down, and they weren't put forward. We have to focus on mental health. We have to think about this. I will say cell phones. My son doesn't have a cell phone. I don't want him to have a cell phone. But part of the cell phone conversation, again, if we don't allow our kids to have cell phones in the classroom and there is an active shooter, there's a lot of parents who are very scared. How is my child going to contact me? And it's scary. And so yes, I think we've got some really good ideas, but we're not really getting to the full root of the issue. I mean, we need mental health expansion. We need to look at, honestly, some gun policies in the state of Texas. We need to think about that. I was there when I saw the Uvalde families, and I spoke to them, and we need to be having real conversations in the state of Texas. I mean, what's happening in our schools is not okay. I mean, these are our children.
Yeah.
So
certainly want to turn it back to our audience for another question.
Candace Johnson again, educator. We're talking about the safety of students. I wonder when in this conversation do we talk about the safety of the educators, those who are there to keep the children safe? Because I'm less concerned about someone coming into the school from the outside. I actually am more concerned as an educator who has been verbally abused, physically abused, accosted, had parents threaten me. When do we bring into the conversation protecting the educators and the teachers there? Because I would just like to ask, has anyone that does not work in education, do you go to your job and get cursed out, spit on, kicked? I have a bruise on my leg right now from a student. Do you go to work and get beat up by your coworkers and then end up in HR with them asking you why you got beat up? So when in this conversation do we start to talk about the safety of the educators who are there to protect the children?
Ken, I'd love to turn that to you. That's part of your job, is advocating for educators. What do you make of that?
Yes. I'll sound a bit like a broken record. It comes down to funding. So what happens on a campus if you've got, so counselors were mentioned earlier. Oh, you got elementary campus. My 10-year-old is in elementary school, 500-600 kids on a campus, one counselor. How in the world do you provide that kind of support that needs to be happening? You're talking about funding a robust support system for kids, but you also want to look at how do we support our teachers. Teachers' needs, you know, we provide needs for kids all through school. When they become 18 and graduate, it's as if they have no more needs anymore. There's no more differentiation. There's no more adjustment for the adult who needs to be differentiated. We all need differentiation. We all need to be respected the way we are. And that means a really radically different type of training. So in terms of how do you protect the teachers, you fund public schools in a way that will allow you to create programs that have the supports on campus that will help them. And until the state and every state in this union really believes in funding their schools, we're going to be hard-pressed to get there. It's going to be very difficult, and it really comes down to funding. You pay for what you believe in. You pay for what you want. And if you want it, you pay for it. And when Texas starts paying for it, they'll get a much better return.
You said you sound like a broken record, and we're going to make you sound like that even more. We're going to talk about education funding. Research.
Oh my God, that's what we're
right? That was
doing.
the perfect transition.
Oh my God.
Research from the Education Data Initiative indicates Texas ranks 42nd in the nation on public school funding. Pooja, would love to start with you. How critical is the discussion for school funding going to be this session?
It's going to be absolutely critical. I don't want to say just the session. Every single session, every cycle, legislators put forth, you know, raising the basic allotment and making sure that our public schools are funded. They put in the effort. They every single time. So it's not like it's just coming up this session. We haven't come upon this crisis like in the past month. This is something that Texas has been facing for years on end, and it's gotten past crisis mode. I'm concerned that they are going to put vouchers. You know, they're going to say we're not going to fund public schools unless vouchers are passed. They are going to put that. They're going to put that mandate on there, and public schools need. I mean, they need to get funded. I mean, it's unbelievable now. I mean, you've got schools where they don't have proper classrooms. They don't have air conditioning. They don't have heaters. I mean, it's getting to a point where our children are going to public schools and not getting access to the resources. There are schools, some schools in Austin that I look at that don't even have access to the same resources that I know that certain schools had 50 years ago. I mean, this is getting to the point of it's beyond a crisis. So yes, I think it's going to be a big thing this session. I really hope that legislators do the right thing and actually fund our public schools, give teachers the raises they deserve, and really put education at the forefront. It needs to be. I don't really know what else to say. I think everyone here agrees that our schools need to be funded. I mean, our kids need to get prioritized. Our kids need to get put first.
I'm glad you brought up the basic allotment. Natalie, I want to turn that to you. The basic allotment has not increased since 2019. What do we mean when we talk about the basic allotment? As someone who works directly in this field of public education, what kind of topics and projects would the basic allotment fund if we were to get that money?
As far as an increase from the legislature, you're saying?
Correct, and just the basic allotment in general. What does that money mean in the public education system?
So let me go back and probably explain a couple of things. Oftentimes when we talk about school funding and the basic allotment, people's thought process is based, I pay my taxes. I pay so much in taxes. Why don't you have enough money? And so I think one of the things that's important for people to understand that every state has the ability to structure their funding system a certain way. And within the state of Texas, what happens is, depending on how so-called rich your district is, even though the taxpayers may put a certain amount into education, it doesn't mean that my district keeps it. And so I know the same thing is for Austin, right? So
yeah.
Round Rock ISD paid back $115 million, had to give back that to the state. I know Austin, it was some kind of ridiculous amount. 800 million. And so I want people to understand, yes, you are paying your taxes, but it doesn't mean that we get to keep all of the money to pay for all of the things that we need within the district. Now, on top of that, also, another something to understand, there's a surplus of over $2 billion with a B, dollars, of the money that we have put in from school districts that the state has. So it's not even that our money is not, that there's not money. The money is just not being given back to us. So I really need people to understand the madness that is happening. Our money is there. Give us back our money. There's $2 billion in surplus. We should not having to be suffering to say that we can't give teachers adequate raises, all these different things. There's this extra surplus there that simply give it back to us. We can fund all the different mandates. We can pay for our curriculum. We can give our teachers raises. We can pay for health insurance for our teachers. Imagine that. Making sure that people have the ability to pay, take care of themselves, their health, and as they're working hard for their communities. And so the basic allotment, also the idea of inflation has increased. We have all felt it within our homes, how much we're paying for our mortgages and rent, for food, for gas. If you've had your roof messed up by the hail damage, do that as well. So when your roof got messed up, the districts, all the roofs, they have to pay for that. And that costs over $500,000. And air conditioning goes out. That's $500,000 to replace it, $250,000 to $500,000. So understanding, and some of these buildings are very old. So when we say basic allotment, you're like, why don't you have enough money? Because you're giving me dollars from 10 years ago. There's no increase, but you have all the inflation and all the extra things that I have to pay for. Increased gas prices, hail damage, air conditioners going out, instructional materials, the increased cost of health care and medications, but yeah, having to do it with dollars from years ago. So all of that to understand within our system, when you talk about students who are in special education or other programming where we love that we have that diversity, that neurodiversity, but it does cost more to educate those students and make sure that their needs are adequately taken care of. And so again, that idea of when students come out of the public school system, and school systems have students with higher needs, but then less money, and then the cost of inflation, it's a recipe for disaster. So we really need to see this within a whole overarching conversation. You can't piecemeal this conversation. It all goes together. So yes, basic allotment, you're giving me money. It's kind of like when my mom gave me, $1 in elementary school for allowance a week. And then by high school, I'm like, this $1's not gonna cut it anymore. I think I need an increase. That's basically what has happened with the basic allotment. You're trying to give a high schooler the $1 that you gave them back when.
On his education priorities in the upcoming session, he announced these just a day after the November election.
We'll have separate pots of money. One for public schools, which we will fully fund, teacher pay raises, which we will fully fund, and then a separate pot for school choice.
You heard it right there. He was essentially, the argument might be made that he was saying that schools aren't publicly funded. Laura, I want to go back. We're talking school choice again.
Okay.
A little bit. It all goes together, kind of back on that front. That's why I want to turn to you. Do you think we can have it done, as Governor Abbott says, where you can have both fully funded public schools as well as the school choice system?
I do think we can, and I hope we will. And he was, the school's choice appropriation is in general revenue, not from the foundation school program. So when he's talking about different pots of money, that is true. So it's not taking away the money that is allocated for the public schools. It is a separate allocation. So I sit here as an advocate for private schools, but yes, our friends and neighbors, we see the suffering that's happening, and we want to make sure that all schools have an opportunity to serve the kids that go to their school and that they're appropriately funded. So yes, we're on board, and I think it's Texas. We should be able to do both.
Ken, what say you to that? Can you do both?
Again, no. This is a guy that had a voucher bill that he attached $150 to the basic allotment. The average $150 was his recommendation. That wouldn't have even played out to even be $20 million in Austin ISD. That's nothing. That's what he thinks is fully funding. He doesn't care about public schools, therefore that won't happen. Maybe something we could pitch in, maybe the religious schools to get tax breaks, maybe they could start pitching into the pot. Maybe they could start giving us some money and actually put some skin in the game in terms of funding our schools, since we all have to do it. You know, it's really frustrating when the governor, it's just rhetoric. He's just talking. We're going to fully fund here. We've got a bucket here. We're going to have choice here. What the hell does that even mean? It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean he's going to fund the way there should be funded. We identified 2019 as some kind of high water mark in local funding for public schools because we haven't had an increase since 2019. We were not swimming in dollars in 2019. We were still reeling from a $5.5 billion cut in public education from 2011 that we had never recovered from. He's not honest. He has an agenda. He wants to get money to private funders, to the ones that are more privileged. He doesn't care about public schools. Nothing he has done in his time in office would show me that he truly cares about public education in any way, shape, or form.
I want to turn it now to our audience to talk a little bit more about public school funding. Again, complicated subject. What do you guys want to see in public education funding from the Texas government?
I mean, you're opening up the floor for questions, but you asked me a question. What do I want to see? I want to see funding that, you know, like we said, puts our money where our mouths are, right? We know how important public education is. We know how important our children are, our students, right? This is the future of Texas. This is the future of our community. So to answer your question, I would like to see dollars that equal programs that help our students with mental health. I would like to see dollars that, instead of trying to keep the ship afloat, right? Instead of trying to patch the holes that keep popping up in the ship, to give us a bigger ship. Right? Give us the money that we need, that we ask for. You have plenty of people who can tell you exactly what we need. Listen to those people.
Pooja, what say to you that? To putting your money where your mouth is, I believe is what he said.
Absolutely. I mean, our children are what matters. I mean, our children are what is most important. You know, going back to the literacy study that I read recently, in America, you know, there was something like 50% of people couldn't even read the directions on a prescription bottle for their medication. I mean, that's where our literacy levels are right now, and it's really scary. I mean, if we're not funding our public schools, if we're not taking care of our teachers, we're not putting money where it matters most, which is our education system, what are we doing? I mean, we're just going to go further and further backwards. I mean, I had a child who fell behind during COVID, and it took us a long time, a lot of tutoring to get him up to date. I mean, these things don't just happen. You can't undereducate, or you can't not have the proper funding and give the children what they need. It's just going to go further and further back, and it's going to get to the point where our kids won't be able to catch up.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we understand that, you know, public education is a system. And I just want to kind of inject here that a public school system is more than teachers. It's a bus driver that gets kids to school. It's a TA that's helping a teacher in the classroom. It's food service workers that provide a meal every day for up to 1,000 or more kids in a school. It's a really robust system that has to be funded richly. Everybody deserves a quality payday. They deserve to have a living, that they don't have to work 2 and 3 jobs. Even the custodian shouldn't have to work 3 jobs to be able to support his or her family.
We're running out of time, so I do want to move on to our final topic very quickly. In 2022, Governor Greg Abbott established a teacher vacancy task force to investigate what the Texas government could do to recruit and retain educators. These were their 8 recommendations unveiled last year. Increasing compensation, enhancing teacher compensation like benefits, providing incentives to hard-to-staff areas, improving teacher training for new teachers, expanding support for teacher mentorship, providing access to quality education materials, respecting and valuing teacher time, ensuring school-wide support like counselors. Pooja, just running through those priorities, do you think the legislature can accomplish those goals next session?
Absolutely. Why didn't they accomplish it last session? It would be nice to hear things that are off a campaign year. They had 2023. They could have accomplished it. I mean, schools were the big talking point at that time. They can absolutely. We have the money. Why aren't we doing it? Why aren't we talking about those things? There were bills that were put in that discussed a lot of those things. Absolutely, they can accomplish those things. They should have accomplished it last session. But yes, I would love to accomplish those campaign goals that Governor Abbott had from 2022. That would be wonderful to see in the upcoming session.
And again, I know we're wrapping up here, but I do want to hear from each of you. Laura, I know I keep asking you kind of a similar question to this. Do you think we can do those things while still having a school voucher or an ESA program in place?
Yes, I think the conversation in the Capitol, it's all about education. So yes, let's talk about all of those things, and ESAs being a part of the whole. And I absolutely think we can do all of those things.
Brian, turning it now to you. I know, again, that's a little bit out of your realm of expertise, given that you're in the private sector. Would love to hear your thoughts, though, about teachers in your education system and whether or not they feel those things as well.
They do feel those things, and we often see some teachers come out of the public system into the private system having faced those same difficulties. We have families within our own school system who maybe the parents are public school teachers, but their children are in our school facing the same issues. I think that I agree with Laura. I think that it can be done. But here's the key, it has to be done. Texas is wealthy enough to have 3 pots and to equally fund, not equally, to fund as needed the different pots that needs to be funded. We are also public school funding advocates. We think that can be done as well as school choice.
Ken and Natalie, turning now to you guys in these final moments. I'll start with you, Ken. Just public education. If we can't accomplish those things I just read out to you, what's that going to do to the public education system?
Well, it will continue to erode. People will leave it. And it'll be even more difficult to staff. We don't want that, because as a father of a 10-year-old child who's coming home, I want to make sure that people understand amazing things are happening in our schools. Incredible stuff every day. He comes home doing work that I didn't do till middle school when I was in school. This is incredible what's happening in our schools today, because you know, you're getting wine on a beer budget here, and the governor's a real beer drinker apparently, because because we've got to fund, but our teachers, our TAs, our school communities are doing stellar work every day, and probably to their detriment, because then the governor doesn't think he needs to do any more. But he can belittle us and beat them down and not fund us. What's going to happen? We're going to make it even harder. But the people that are working within the system are still going to help our kids, in spite of Governor Abbott, in spite of this legislature.
Natalie, same question to you in our final moments. So if we can't accomplish those things that I just read out, what's that going to do to the public education system?
And I totally agree with what has just been said. Many people, the great thing about being in education is it is uniquely tied to people's purpose and their passion. But there comes a point where I cannot sustain that based on these additional stressors. So my concern is that the stressors will become too much, too high, too much of a cost to people to begin to live within this space and to serve children, communities, and parents in this way. And that is the thing that most concerns me, that there will come a point where people will not be able to sacrifice themselves and their own families in order to meet the needs of others.
Natalie, thank you, and thank you to each of our panelists for taking part, as well as our audience for letting us hear their questions directly from them. And thank you for joining us for our town hall discussion on education in Texas. I'm Michael Atkinson. Good night.